Oh, what a great picture you have behind you with Finney.
Yes, Dr. Finney from Australia. We spoke together in Australia about 5 years ago. So took that photo and framed it.
That's probably where you subliminally affected me, because I have my Finney photo.
Oh, that's great.
From there.
Up there, we were in Jerusalem.
Yes. We're all bragging on knowing Dr. Finney, that's for sure. Well, thank you guys for being here today, and congratulations on your new book, End Your Carb Confusion.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
So now, can I see, hang on just a sec. Oh, thank you. And I just want to be able to see me or us.
I don't know if you can.
We're still too bright, huh?
I can see you. We're gonna roll with this. So that's Eric Westman, Dr. Eric Westman. Duke University, everybody knows who he is. And next to him is Amy Berger. I've had Amy on the Live and La Vida Low Carb show a few times, talking about Alzheimer's disease. I think you told me one time that I was the first podcast you ever came on. So
I was gonna say my very first podcast ever was your show.
I think mine was, or Eric was also mine as well. But when nobody knew what podcasts were, Eric, you were within the first 50 episodes. Because I didn't start interviewing until I started going to the Obesity Society kind of conferences, and you're like, you should interview these people. I'm like, I don't know how to interview. So
I know I created a monster.
You did, and this is like 1,700 and something episodes now, and I love it. And so thank you both for what you do in the keto and low carb space, and you're going to help us in the carb confusion, because I think so many people, this is like a big topic. Even when we were writing this book, people are like, how many carbs do you eat? And I know your philosophy has always been, Eric, to start people at 20 total grams and then adjust from there. That's always been your basic philosophy, not to play the net carb game, not to try to do anything, just keep carbs low, and then the other things will fall into place. What has changed from that philosophy, or is that still your basic tenet when you start and then you adjust?
Well, that's still the basic tenet. but the End Your Carb Confusion, at the moment, do you think there's confusion?
Extreme confusion.
So back when we started, it wasn't so confusing, and so it turns out the tune that I learned, or the method I learned from Dr. Atkins, Dr. Eads, Dr. Bernstein, Dr. Rosedale, all of these doctors that we did the research then studying this method, they had a very simple approach, and the most important thing was keeping the carbs low. So really, in End Your Carb Confusion, if you choose, or if you're, so we have you take a short little questionnaire of how many carbs we think you could probably eat and still be healthy. If you do end up in the under 20 gram total per day, it's going to be very similar to what you've seen in these other, it's similar to Atkins induction, protein power, first phase of South Beach, although we don't say fat's bad. So it's like the old school, but you know, what's new is, and I hope I don't, you know, make people upset, is that we don't say everyone needs to do keto, which is kind of the reality of being in this world for the space for 20 years.
Guys, I hope you caught that. One of the leading and premier researchers in the history of ketogenic diets just said, you may not need to do keto. And I'm in cahoots with that, by the way. You and I have been pegged in this low carb keto space so hard that they think we think everybody should eat keto. I think that little lady to the left of you has had a little influence on your thinking on this. Because Amy, the reason why people are confused about carbohydrates and what they should do is there's so many more like products available now. There's so many more ingredients that didn't exist when Eric first started doing some of his research into ketogenic diets. Is that the problem? And is that what's happening? Or is it more voices saying, oh, it's okay to have this, it's okay not to have this, you should do this, you do that? What's the deal?
Yeah, I wish there was only one problem, because then you could just talk about the one problem and everybody would know what to do. It's like a hydra or the Medusa with a million different snakes out of her head, or it's like the whack-a-mole. You dispel one myth and 10 more pop up. Yeah. And part of it is, you know, look around the world. There's billions of healthy, lean people that eat carbohydrates. But, you know, that's not going to work for everybody. And when we do have so many more people coming into the space, which is great, we have a lot of people with different medical histories, different genetics, different dietary histories, different needs. And so, for example, a 65-year-old, you know, morbidly obese postmenopausal woman may not have the same success on quote unquote keto, following the advice that a 24-year-old CrossFitting guy who's never had an excess ounce of fat on his body is telling her to do. And they can both be low carb or ketogenic diets, but they can't be really formulated the exact same way. And so when people are trying to listen to advice that doesn't apply to them, and it's not that the advice is bad or wrong, it's just not appropriate for that person's situation.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem, Eric, is even still to this day, it baffles me with how available it is to test your blood sugar, why more people don't do it. And of course, even within that, I know Amy's talked about this, definitely going to get Amy's thoughts on this in a second, but we put so much emphasis on blood sugar, blood sugar, blood sugar, blood sugar. People aren't even doing that when the real enemy is the insulin. And we don't know what insulin is doing when you're testing any given blood sugar. I know you do a lot of blood sugar tests, but insulin testing has kind of fallen by the wayside, at least in the mainstream. I know I had to fire my own personal family doctor because he refused to run fasting insulin on me. And I'm like, I'm insulin resistant. I kind of need to know what's going on there. And he just wouldn't do it. So why do you think insulin, even now, like this is 20 something years later after you first started studying ketogenic diets, why isn't it more popular that it should be tested as one of the primary markers?
Well, so you've known me for a long time. I thought that it's because there's no science. It's because there's no science. That's if doctors only knew the science and the science. Well, after 20 years being, you know, seeing this, I was going to say beaten down, but I haven't been beaten down, you know, personally. It's more professionally. It's the money. You know, doctors don't make money from checking insulin, and there are no drugs to push to make money on that. I think that's so we teach doctors in the long run, called CME, or continuing medical education, to prescribe drugs. And that's a big educational issue that it's really hard to overcome. But at a personal level, you just have to find your doctor, or you can get a blood test in many states on your own by just ordering it at one of these store fronts. You can go in and get your blood tested and check your insulin. Yeah. But there's no reason for a doctor to do it. There's no guideline that says you should. There's no financial gain for, you know, so although it does make some patients happy to do it, I don't understand why. I mean, if someone asked me to do a test that I don't do every day, but it's reasonable, I'll say, well, sure, I'll do it, but I don't know if insurance will cover it. And if they say, well, I'll pay for it, then it's okay. You know, so a lot of the times it's the fear that you're going to be the patient unhappy that they have to pay for the test that the doctor does. Well, just open that discussion, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, when I asked my doctor about running fasting insulin, he's like, well, you're not diabetic, so I can't do an ICD code. I'm like, I'm okay paying for the $50 for the insulin test. And they're like, no, we still can't do it. I'm okay, that's unreasonable. If a patient is asking for it, the least you can do is run that test. By the way, those tests, any lab test now is the little centers he's talking about. They're all over the country now. Anylabtestnow.com. I use this company and not affiliated with them in any way, but private mdhealth.com. They have like little tests that you can have run. It's really sophisticated in 2020, all the things you can have run on yourself, but definitely consult with somebody that knows what they're doing. But Amy, for you, I mean, you were the one that really put it on my radar screen that the problem isn't hyperglycemia, it's hyperinsulinemia. And the sooner we understand the role insulin is playing in all aspects of our health, is the sooner we'll be able to progress on why certain carbohydrate levels don't work with certain people, why you need to eat more protein than fat in this circumstance for this reason. How do we communicate that? I guess to the people that matter, it's both the lay people that are educated, that are trying, that would be listeners to my podcast, as well as the medical professionals.
Yeah, I wish I knew how to educate the medical professionals. I don't know how we bring this message to them, but our book is definitely an attempt to educate the public because, look, doctors want to help you. That's they chose the career path to help you get healthy, but nobody cares about your health more than you do. So don't wait for your doctor to wake up. You can wake up right now. You can learn about, not you, Jimmy, you already know, but the people listening and watching. We can all learn about insulin, and it is so critical because how many millions of people out there have all kinds of strange, bothersome health issues that nobody can explain because they're not overweight, they don't have diabetes, and so the doctors, I don't know what's wrong with you, see you in 6 months, when if they had measured the insulin, oh, your insulin is 42, no wonder. But I do want to be clear that fasting insulin has some shortcomings, just like fasting glucose does, where sometimes it can be high and it's not automatically a problem. So I know some doctors don't like it because it can be so volatile, but I think it's a starting point. I think it's worth doing. I think it's still helpful sometimes.
It's like any other biomarker. You take it in the totality of all the biomarkers and how the patient feels, Eric, right? Like when a patient comes in and you happen to see a humongous insulin number, but then other numbers look really good. Triglycerides under 100, you got HDL over 50, their inflammatory markers look okay. You're not freaking out over kind of one number ever anyway. And so that's a good point. Thank you for that, Amy. And I think that's what's lost is medicine seemingly these days, Eric, has become a numbers game, and it's not the trend. It's not what's happening over time. It's this moment in time, you have high cholesterol, so let's put you on a statin, and it's so reactionary medicine rather than treating the patient.
Absolutely. And the idea you just mentioned that cholesterol is a disease, and if it's high, you have to treat it with a drug. This is. I guess I've talked to Ken Berry enough, and this is madness. Cholesterol, you need cholesterol in the blood. High cholesterol is not just a disease that you treat with a drug, but that's what it's become. It's a very transactional thing. Well, I think doctors are under, almost like investors, companies, they're under the pressure to get your number in order, this quarter or now. Even some doctors get a bonus, or they get a attaboy, at least. All of your people with diabetes are on a statin drug, yay, hooray for you. And if you don't have a certain percentage, you get a demerit or a nasty letter from the organization saying you haven't met the guidelines. So we're pushing doctors to follow guidelines, and that basically means drug treatment. Sadly, we Obesity Medicine, which is the organization I was past president, I am past president of. We know that lifestyle change, treating obesity with not only lifestyle but drugs and other things, fixes so many things. You don't need medications to manage diabetes or high blood pressure. You can actually fix those things, reverse them and fix them by just changing the food, which, that's a revelation to me, that as an internist, as a doctor, that changing the food could be so powerful. Who knew? We weren't trained that. So back in the day when we met Dr. Atkins, Dr. Eves, these doctors who had done it for their careers, that opened my eyes. And then, of course, we didn't start doing it. We started doing research first. And that's kind of our claim to fame, Dr. Yancey and I, doing the research at Duke, validating that this is a healthy thing to do. And so we tried to bring all that wisdom into this book without getting too deep into the, you don't have to measure the insulin to know, but what we have are the syndromes that are associated with. So you might have PCOS or heartburn or other things that are from the insulin being high, but you don't actually have to measure it as a, in our book, we don't say, go check this and that. And so we're trying to make it as user-friendly I have to admit that when the glucose watch happens, I mean, so that you don't have to prick yourself all the time, or everyone's going to be measuring their glucose, right? I mean, so even today, the CGMs where the continuous glucose monitor, where you can put the disc on your arm or your belly, just like that, it still has a little, it is off-putting to some people because it involves blood and all that. I mean, once you have it, it's no big deal. But I have to imagine that the whole world will start gravitating toward eating this way when we get that glucose watch sensor,
Well, and I've said the same thing about like an at-home insulin test. Oh, you think that whole wheat bagel with fat-free cream cheese and orange juice for breakfast is going to serve you well? Test your insulin afterwards. Let's see.
I don't know why that doesn't exist. If it's a technical thing or not enough people are doing it. Kind of remember the ketone strip measurement at first. They said, well, there's no market, right? There aren't people doing keto strips, and then new companies bubble up to create ketone strips.
I actually interviewed Dr. Ben Bigman, and I asked him that question about why there's not an at-home insulin test. And it's something about how the blood has to be spun in a certain way, and you can't do that in a prick, just like blood glucose is easier for that reason. So yeah, but if they can figure out that piece, it's definitely going to be a multi-trillion-dollar company at some point, because I think it will be high demand. But I think part of the carb confusion, Amy, is carb is such a generic term. It's kind of like fat. Fat is vilified. Well, there's healthy fats and there's unhealthy fats. And then there's what the mainstream says is healthy and is unhealthy. And then what's really healthy and what's unhealthy. Same with carbs. Carbs are not the enemy. And it's something that I think sometimes those of us in the low carb world, people kind of peg us as, well, you just vilify all carbohydrates. And I don't think that's been ever true. And so how do you make this distinction between the carbohydrates so that you do help to clear up the carb confusion?
Well, so in our book, it's kind of new in the keto world in that we don't demonize carbohydrate. We do demonize sugar a little bit, but we don't, we would be frankly outright lying if we said that, strawberries cause diabetes. Strawberries are a carb. Cabbage has carbohydrate. We're not even things like black beans, even things like potatoes, even starchier carbs. We're not saying that those things are in and of themselves harmful. But when you're already in a health state or a metabolic state where you can't tolerate that, you probably have to limit them at least for some period of time. So even just because the therapy involves restricting them doesn't mean they were necessarily the cause. I think it's caused by a confluence of factors, but we do talk about the difference between sugar and simple carbs compared to something like a potato or black beans or fruit. But we also make it very clear that, we wrote this book to make it as simple as possible. You don't have to whip out an app or a spreadsheet to calculate anything. You don't have to worry about any math or numbers. So in order to make it dead simple, limit all carbohydrates, at least at first. Limit everything so you don't have to worry about the glycemic index or the fiber, the net carbs, this and that. Forget all of that. Limit all of it. Live your life. Enjoy your very low carb food. And at some point, you might get to a spot in your health or your weight where you're able to very gradually add things back in and see how you do.
And Eric, you've seen patients for a very long time there in Durham, North Carolina, and you tend to have a lower income, older population that comes in. And when you start talking about removing carbohydrates, you're like, that's like a sin in that area because they live by a lot culturally. A lot of carbohydrates are a basis of that. How do you have that discussion when there's limited income, when there's cultural connection to carbohydrate? How do you help them want to lower carbs?
Yeah, well, from my patients who have a wide range of ethnic backgrounds and socioeconomic status, I've learned that one of my patients started eating at McDonald's and was losing 15 pounds a month. I don't know the last time I went to McDonald's, but we're not talking about me, we're talking about my patients. So So actually, he started eating off the dollar menu, and it was actually saying that he was spending less on the food than before. And so there are a lot of ways to do this. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be difficult. Culturally, yeah, the eyes, as you can imagine, no grits, so if or grits, depending on where you're from.
Grits, yes, grits, yes.
But they're made from corn, and so the balance for those who can just follow a simple list of foods, this works beautifully. So you don't have to know what a carb is. You just have to know the way we do it. And in End Your Carb Confusion, there's a list, and you follow it. So actually, I find that the professors at the university are the hardest ones because they're overthinking things. Well, can I have this? Well, it's not on the list. Well, but so-and-so said, no. So I have actually some of my favorite patients are just the simple folks who just follow the list. And so I'll plant them in my support groups from time to time and have them stand up and say, how did you have such great results? And I just follow the list. So, but the great thing about it, I used to help people quit smoking, which for 10 years I was in the research world and for quitting smoking. Now that is tough. I mean, fortunately for quitting carbs, it's a lot easier. The cravings go away for just about everyone after a day or two. The hunger goes away, and that's how it works for eating less and losing weight. For just about everyone, it's automatic. Not everyone, and that leaves a role for people like me and Amy to individualize things. But no, I find that culturally, you just limit the amount. That's another thing we talk about. It's not an all or nothing. You want to minimize the amount of grits, for example. Or another common thing is alcohol or things that people think you can never have. We just discuss how it affects the body and how you have to moderate the amount. But even though we have an area here where we have a lot of native people from India, which is a largely vegetarian society, and you can do vegetarian. I mean, I don't prefer that as a method because, how could you live without brisket, But again, it's not me, so we're just transferring the information that you want to limit the sugars. But it really cuts across all ethnic groups, socioeconomic status, and we have to dispel the myths about, oh, it's so expensive. Well, no, it doesn't have to be. Oh, well, you can't be vegetarian. No, yes, you can.
Right.
So those myths, they're the same ones over the last 20 years, Jimmy. Did you know that?
I have heard them a few times, yes. So, Amy, is this an argument, at least to start, since you mentioned a moment ago about the goal is to just start by eliminating as many carbohydrates as possible and still enjoying the food and da-da-da. Is this an argument for maybe starting kind of carnivore-ish, as long as you don't have the religious objections where you're vegetarian? Could that be a good place to start and then work in the carbs as needed?
Well, I don't think I'm not opposed to the carnivore diet. I think humans can live without spinach and broccoli, but so we have 3 phases of the diet that we recommend, and the first phase is his based on his famous page 4, which is based on Dr. Atkins's induction phase very closely. But the carbohydrate, the total amount that you're allowed there is so low anyway. I want to say you're almost carnivore. You're not really, because that does allow for a little bit of lettuce and mushrooms and very low carb vegetables. And there's no nuts and seeds on our plan, at least not in that phase. But you can eat small amounts of carbohydrate foods. It's just really limited. And honestly, for some people, a lot of men, I'm stereotyping a little bit here, but a lot of men love the carnivore life. You mean I get to eat my steak and I don't have to choke down the Brussels sprouts? Like, where do I sign? So if you want to start there, fine. But if you don't, if you genuinely enjoy vegetables, I actually like vegetables. You can have them. You just have to have certain kinds in certain amounts. But I mean, the diet certainly is protein and fat focused. So and that's going to be meat. It's going to be poultry, fish, eggs, red meat, pork.
So I'm warming up to the idea of carnivore because of data being collected. I mean, right now it's data of people actually doing it. Sean Baker now has a researcher looking at the experience of people doing carnivore, and if I can look over, blood tests and charts, and here are real people doing it for X amount of time. This is how I got into low carb, as it was called 20 years ago. It was the overwhelming internet. I mean, case studies, pre-posts. I mean, you can ignore it, or you can say this is interesting and study it. I even asked Amber O'Hearn to write up a paper about, to formalize what she's been speaking at meetings for so long, speaking about, and we got that paper published in October. So I've now risen to that level of doctor. I said, don't ever trust that doctor when they're just doing special issues and they're just editor. Well, I'm now asked to be special editor of journals, but I'm also very promoting of collecting evidence and research still. I haven't lost that side of it.
Yeah. Real quick, I just want to add, for some people, it's easier to do things all or nothing or very black and white. For some people, they want to have more flexibility, but if you're someone that doesn't even want to, the only thing you have to keep track of on our plan is carbs. That's it. If you don't even want to do that, then do carnivore, because you don't have to worry. Is this 5 carbs? Is it 10? Just eat meat. If you don't eat any carbs, you don't eat. So if you would rather start off that way, so you don't even have to think at all, I think we both would say that's probably fine.
And that's been your philosophy all along, Eric, is just keep the carbs in check, and then everything else will take care of itself. I think sometimes people want you to give them instruction on, is it high fat? Is it high protein? But those, if you're eating them in their natural state, those foods, as long as you're limiting carbohydrates, those are not going to be harming you one way or the other that you choose to go.
Right. Yeah. And so we try to simplify things. Yeah. Is that okay? Keep it really simple. And so remember the movie Men in Black? I even will pretend I have the neuralizer. I'm going to erase everything you've been taught about nutrition. And then, of course, you might need repeated dosing, and so, but because people have been taught a certain way, and it takes me a little while to learn, I confess, but we do repeat some of the same things to just counteract everything that people have been taught. We want to keep it as simple as possible. And, no one was counting calories 100 years ago. There were no apps, there was no bulletproof coffee and MCT and all this, and people were fine.
I think one where people get hung up, you were just saying, Jimmy, that when you keep the carbs really low, everything else the protein and fat take care of themselves. And they should, but when people start getting all this other information, like you have to have a certain percentage of fat in your diet, or this protein can only be so much, and we start fiddling with things, then you can get into trouble. Like, just keeping the carbs low isn't going to be enough if you're tinkering in some way that you don't even need to tinker.
Or these new products. I had someone who was just drinking apple cider vinegar, and because he thought, well, that's what keto is, right? You have to have apple cider vinegar, but it cut out his hunger. So he wasn't hungry, and then you hear, well, if you're not hungry, don't eat. The problem was he wasn't eating anything.
Wow.
So he very intelligent person, highly, I think even PhD level, again, kind of overtrained. So that, no, you want protein comes first, and I'm not a big fan of these products, and yet I know people want products. They I need this vitamin, don't I? Well, what if the vitamins were all in the food you ate? Wouldn't that be great? But actually, George E. talks a lot about the psychology of subtraction. That all you're doing is taking away, subtracting things from people. People want to be given something. Well, we're given excellent food. And I learned I could live on brisket. Collar. I mean, yeah. So, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, give it a chance. Give it a chance.
Yeah, I think we've become conditioned, especially in America, to have an expectation of packaged foods kind of being a part of our lifestyle. And so when people come into the low carb keto space, and they've done it forever, Eric, since we've been in this space, wanting those things. The Atkins company did it for a while, and then there were the Quest bars. In fact, you're a part of a company now, the Adapt company, that makes various things. I will say Adapt has a lot better quality products than some of the other ones you see out there. So don't fear all products, but using them sparingly, not as your daily sustenance.
Right, and that's our philosophy, even at that. So we provide products and we don't sell them well because we want you to eat real food mainly.
I mean, and this way of eating, a not necessarily keto, but carbohydrate reduction, people have known about this for 200 years. I mean, this, like Riyad Savaran, the most famous, culinary writer, wrote about this in the 1820s, that, corpulent, heavy people should reduce their starch and sugar intake. And none of this stuff existed back then, right? You couldn't measure your ketones back then. MCT oil didn't exist. None of this stuff existed, and people did fine. And I'm not saying that this stuff is never helpful or convenient or just makes it more fun for people, but none of it is necessary to get, to lose weight or to reverse type 2 diabetes or get any of the other great things that this way of eating does.
Yeah, I wonder, Jimmy, with the time passing, I'm still waiting for some studies on using the exogenous ketones like people are selling and consuming. I know a lot of people do. I don't recommend those in my practice. I'm kind of waiting for that science to come through. And the studies that have been done on these ketones that you drink, for example, are not very impressive. So, I mean, maybe some people get benefit, but so I haven't incorporated that in my general teaching. What are your thoughts these days?
Well, the interviewees becoming the interviewer. I love it. I think
you have wisdom that I like and need.
I think they are good in circumstances. I think if you have a traumatic brain injury or Alzheimer's or some other condition which would require having an influx of ketones. I remember one of the conferences we were at, somebody said they had a heart attack, they would want to inject ketones right into their heart right away. So I think for targeted purposes, absolutely, I think they could be good. I will throw in, along with exogenous ketones, BHB salts, the esters as well. I think the esters are faster acting if you're a runner and you're trying to get like a quick boost of energy for your run. That's going to be jet fuel to help you in that instance. But I think the willy-nilliness, and especially the MLMs involved, it's too slick. It's too many claims that don't make sense. I'm not a fan of them, especially the way they're marketed. Put your body into a state of ketosis within 59 minutes or less. Yeah, bullshit. It doesn't happen. It puts your body, it has ketones in your body, and then they're fleeting. They're out of your body. I've done a lot of N=1 tests of this. They're out of your body within about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And then you have to refuel them again. And it's like, to what end? To what end does that maybe inhibit your body's own endogenous production of that? So I have major issues with the EKs.
There was a study looking at could they reduce the keto adaptation? Could they reduce keto flu symptoms and all that? And again, it was didn't have a huge effect, if it had any effect at all. So a lot of these, a little help I really haven't been substantiated.
Yeah, the only instance within that realm that I've seen that they could be helpful is like day 2 of a fast. If you're doing an extended fast, day 1 should be easy. That's called keto. Day 2 is when your body's like, okay, dummy, are we going to eat today? And so you kind of have really rough symptoms on day 2 of a fast. So I will sometimes consume a couple of doses of EKs on day 2 of a fast. And then by the time you get to day 3, ketones are high enough, blood sugar's low enough, you're good to go. Again, targeted for specific reasons, not just willy-nilly take it for no good reason.
And people need to understand, I think this, like, sort of old veterans like us and many of your viewers and listeners know this, but for people that are new, for most purposes, maybe, like you said, there are applications where the exogenous ketones might be very helpful. But for the purposes of weight loss and reversing some of these metabolic aberration, PCOS, non-alcoholic fatty liver, the reason that this way of eating works is the lower blood sugar and lower insulin. It doesn't work because of the ketone. So I don't even love that. Like, we call it the book End Your Carb Confusion. We purposely did not put keto in the title because this diet is not about having ketones. It's about having a very low carb intake. And I think people get, I don't even like the phrase low. So keto to me is not a high fat diet. It's a very low carb diet. And I don't even love the phrase LCHF because, like it's, that gives equal emphasis to the low carb and high fat, when what makes the diet ketogenic is the low carb part. And not that we're afraid of fat. Eat fat, enjoy fat. Finally, a diet where I don't have to eat skinless chicken. But it's the emphasis doesn't need to be on higher and higher and higher fat.
Well, and here's the thing. Keto was never a diet. Keto was always a metabolic state.
Yeah.
And for some people, that metabolic state cannot be induced until you're very, very low on the carbohydrate scale. Others, I hate them, can eat 100, 150 grams. They're very athletic. They're burning it off in their working out, and they're still ketogenic at that level of carbohydrate. So to say keto is a diet, how do you have those juxtapositions of carbohydrate intake and they're both still in a ketogenic state?
And people talk about, carrots aren't keto, this food isn't keto. Food is not ketogenic. Your body is ketogenic. Like you were saying, the diet is not ketogenic. Your body is what is in the ketogenic state.
Yeah, but Eric, it became a trend. Like when you and I were first around and you were on the scene before me, it was low carb or Atkins. That was the vernacular. But then once kind of keto came into the vernacular, people just juxtaposed low carb and Atkins now with keto. And it was actually a mistake. With low carb and Atkins, it was accurately describing those foods. But keto, she makes a good point. Keto does not describe a food.
Right. Yeah, well, but the trends, the names will come and go and all that. And a main theme of the book is that not everyone needs to be that low on the carbs to have a keto state, or some people have more carbs and be in a keto state. I mean, I had to try to explain to, for example, my brother, who can eat fruit all day long and have 150 grams of carbs a day and be healthy. But he also is out playing tennis all the time. He's a natural runner and athletic metabolism. And Glenn Finkel, my business partner at Adapt Your Life, how he can be an elite athlete and cycle and all this and eat more carbs. So we're trying to bring the knowledge that we have that sugar is really the thing you need to minimize. And you don't have to be so low on the carbs, but you may benefit from it. Some people don't know that their heartburn is from the carbs they're eating. I mean, and how cool is that if all you had to do is eat meat all day and your heartburn would be gone?
In fact, you did a study by accident on heartburn one time. I think your very first study on heartburn was you weren't measuring that, but people were reporting it spontaneously to you so much that you're like, well, dang, I have to put it in the study. And then it kind of became a focal point. That was really cool.
Yeah, so many things do get better, but there are a lot of different ways of going about it. I've studied low glycemic diets, and this is really including low glycemic diets. So it's like we're taking away the named diets and just putting it in terms of different foods. And yes, using total carbs as the scientific guideposts, well, kind of loose guidelines, if you will, because that's what the science says. And I've been trying to be true to the science and stay away from the hype and the colors and all this. But purple is a great color, right? I mean, so this is why when I met Amy at an Adapt Your Life event, and I knew she was kind of the same mindset of keeping things simple, and she was a professional writer and had written the Alzheimer's Antidote, I said, hey, why don't you help me translate what we know into language that people can understand.
Amy, better you than me, because it was tough writing a book with this guy.
Well, I always say that you wrote Keto Clarity, and I helped. I mean, that, and Cholesterol Clarity too, which was a book way before its time. I get so many questions about cholesterol, and it's probably going to be one of the next classes we do. So, have you heard we announced and opened the Adapt Your Life Academy?
No.
There are now digital classes. Yeah, cholesterol clarity.
That's still one of my favorite. I recommend cholesterol clarity. Anytime I get a question about it, that is my #1 go-to. I think I still think that's a dynamite book.
Way ahead of its time. And yet, so we might need to redo that. But yeah, Keto Made Simple Masterclass was the first offering from the Adapt Your Life Academy. So it's adaptyourlifeacademy.com. So Glenn Finkel and Glenn and Yale and I decided this year, because we couldn't go around the country visiting, because of the COVID, we decided, and we did, we had 12 to 15 Adapt Your Life weekend events that were great, and we would bring local experts and local followers of keto together. So early this year, in January, when we did our last one, in fact, Sean Baker was there in Long Beach, and we decided to do a digital platform instead. So we worked hard all year to create a class that people can take, and we opened it up for the first time in December. So if you can imagine, we filed 600 people, not everyone was new though, into one Facebook group, all starting at the same time, and probably one of the hardest times of the year. And we helped people lose half a ton of weight in that month by self-report. But so if you want, what I did is I created videos with the key content, very similar to End Your Carb Confusion, but it's in a video format. We'll be opening up another Keto Made Simple Masterclass in January. Hopefully every month or two we'll do this. It was great.
People love the hand holding. It's just amazes me. Like when you write a book, and you guys, again, congratulations on your book. But when you write a book, it's like people are like, okay, and I need a little more. Like they almost want you to grab them by the hand and say, okay, what you just read, do that. So it's like, don't make it hard, but they like that hand holding aspect. And I guess there's a little bit of a personalized touch. So I'm glad you created that support system for them.
By popular demand. So what we did is we have this class people can purchase and go through, watch the videos, you take little tests along the way and get a certificate. And we started with a 3-week Facebook forum, some place where we could all get together to sort of lower the hurdle of fear of getting started. Here you get the class, but we'll also help you through the first few weeks. And then by popular demand, a certain percentage wanted to continue. So we've actually now morphed into adapted, pun intended, Adapt Your Life, adapted into a paid membership monthly, so that we are now doing special content. And what's cool is that these are people who we know have gone through the class. So you don't get all of the weird comments about, can I? It's like, did you look at the book? Did you look at the class? And a lot of people don't want those distractions. A lot of people got annoyed that, didn't that other person read the book, or didn't they watch the video? So we're creating a protected environment. Of course, that is a small fee, but where you can get information without all of the clutter.
It's kind of like the people in your support group meetings, which you guys have an amazing monthly support group. Have you guys met at all other than virtually this year? Have you met at all? Just virtually.
Virtually. Yeah.
People will be like, can I have on your diet? And you're like, is it on page 4?
Well, now it's the Adapt food list, keto food list. So it's a different name, different brand, but it's very similar. In fact, someone at the end of the class said, when can I get page 4? But when really it was the Adapt food list was really page 4. So
you already have it.
This is one problem with having multiple aspects of it.
Yeah, what to eat right there.
Yeah, so it's a very actionable book, right?
Yes.
It's not just here's why, we show you how.
I mean, I think, Jimmy, this book it's right up your alley too, because I think you are one of the masters of translating the scientific gobbledygook into plain English so that people can actually do something with it. Like, okay, here's this amazing research of this great, here's this amazing pathway. What does that mean to me when I'm shopping at the supermarket? What does it mean when I'm ordering in a restaurant? And I think we try to,
follow that.
Explain, yeah. We don't have any scientific references in the book, which I think is a big deal for him, but that was his idea. And it's because we don't say anything controversial, because we're not telling you that, you know, blueberries are killing you, and we're not telling you that you can never, ever, ever have a slice of bread again. We're not saying anything like that. So, but I just think this, you know, we've all been in this for so long. It's second nature to us. We don't even think about it anymore. But it's so complicated and so crazy now. This is the book that I think we would want if we were brand new. If we didn't know anything about this and we were just getting started, like, how would you even, can you imagine being new now? There's 8 million YouTube channels. There's 5,000 books. There's Reddit. There's like, when we were all new, social media didn't exist.
Right.
Like, you didn't even know what a podcast was. I didn't either back then. Facebook didn't exist. We didn't have not even an iPhone, not even smartphones, and it was easier to start because you read the Atkins book or you read Protein Power and you did the program. And I'm so happy that low carb and keto are so popular now, but it also makes it so much harder for people to begin, because if I was new, I cannot even imagine where I would get information from and who I would trust.
Yeah, it would be so overwhelming, which is why when people tell me, how do I trust? I'm like, find someone that you trust and stick with them, because it's just easier than trying to go and hear from all the voices. And then there's people that are like, well, I don't want to miss anything. I'm like, well, find that one person that's like the purveyor of all these different people that can help filter it out for you. I try to be that for people. But there's a lot of good people out there doing great work. I think Ken's doing great work. You guys are doing great work. It's just like, find who you connect with, Thomas DeLauer, find who you connect with and stick with them. Because there are a lot of shysters, unfortunately, that have gotten involved in the industry and looking to make dollars and not looking to change lives.
True statement.
Absolutely.
Well, guys, before we go, I want to get your thoughts. I'm gonna start with you, Amy, on a couple of surprise little things here at the end. It's hard.
Okay.
Not hard. So the vegan burger meat movement has taken off, Amy. A lot of billionaires kind of investing in these companies. Do you see them having traction in any way, or do they apply to this low carb lifestyle? Should people be concerned about them? What are your thoughts?
Wow. So, just in the strictest sense of, if they're very low in carbohydrate, then they technically fit within our sort of plan. But I wish that people who think that that kind of stuff is environmentally friendly or saves energy, I wish that you could see the production process from field to packaged burger in a shrink wrap thing in a box. See the harvesting, see how many animals are killed during that process, see the engineering feeds, see what's going on at the factory. Or you could go to a farm and there's a cow and then it gets, you know, slaughtered, or hopefully humanely, and there's meat. It's I just think it's very misleading as to the actual truth of how that stuff is produced and what kind of energy and environmental inputs it takes to get that on your supermarket shelf.
And when a Beyond Meat burger has 29 ingredients and a cow burger has 1, that alone kind of should make the point of which is really the healthier one. A lot of strange ingredients too in the Beyond Meat burger. When I saw they put like beet juice to mimic blood, I'm like, okay, you're crossing a line there. So.
If you want to eat meat, stop trying to make everything look and taste and feel like meat. Just admit that you don't want to eat meat and enjoy your vegetables.
Although I could see them using it kind of like we do in the keto world with all the sugar-free and low-carb snacks. It's a way into the vegan lifestyle, so maybe that's their modus operandi.
And I see that point, because I know in keto we have that same problem with the keto cupcakes and the keto brownies. Well, if you don't want to eat sugar, stop eating things that look and taste like sugar. So that is kind of I don't know if that's a valid argument for me to make with the burgers, but there's a lot of, they're pulling the wool over the eyes of people that think that that's an environmentally sustainable way of getting protein.
Yeah, and in fact, they got Christopher Gardner, just as a side note, Eric, they got Christopher Gardner to do one of the studies on these burgers compared to a beef burger. And they looked at triglycerides and HDL and inflammation markers, and across the board, they couldn't find anything that was different between the two study groups. And they found one obscure little marker that they're, oh, see, that's off the charts different. And it was so obscure, I didn't even know what it was. I forget what it is now, but it was like some alphabet soup marker. And I'm going, I've literally never heard any study that uses that marker. But that's how desperate it seems that they're even getting people like Christopher Gardner, who in the press release said, yeah, we didn't really find much difference. And I'm glad for the funding. And he was just like stuttering, trying to figure out how to put a spin on this.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, you have to admire Dr. Gardner. He does study things, and he actually has studied the Atkins diet, low carb diets. And I remember he would get up and say, I'm a vegetarian, but this diet actually worked pretty well. So he like most university professors, and sadly not me, I won't study just anything. Most university professors will study anything if you give them the funding, and try not to be too promotional of any certain approach. But no, I missed that study. It didn't bubble up to my radar.
I will send it to you so you can see it. But it was, I did it on Jimmy Rants. I do a show here called Jimmy Rants, and I highlighted it, and I saw Christopher Gardner's name, and it's like, wait, I've got to read this. And then when I saw the press release, I'm like, yeah, that's the Christopher Gardner, the A to Z study. That's the one he did, right?
Yeah. One. But so Lucia Abronica moved to work at Stanford I think in large part because of the A to Z study. They were doing low carb, and she teamed up in a recent paper. Did you see genetic variants for? Yeah, that was the one I was going to talk about. So that
see, I'm on the game, brother. I know these things.
That's awesome. But so, in fact, it was Rob Siwas who had a patient who was had a bizarre high triglyceride on a keto diet. I think we ought to have a center, whether it's Stanford or Volek at Ohio State, where we could send our blood or blood of our patients to get that kind of genetic analysis. So we're not having to say, oh, well, it might be this or that. No, we can know today, in a research setting anyway, what the genetic differences are and why an LDL is elevated, for example. And they do have a sidebar in that paper to explain that LDL sometimes goes up, but we don't think it's harmful. And that's kind of one of the last scientific or medical fears that has to be dispelled. Yeah, so you have that paper. Of course you do.
I'm doing a Jimmy Rants on it this week, so that's why it's next to me here. Well, Eric, I have one more question for you. So the big story last year in 2020, because this is airing in 2021, was the virus. And I know you were a big proponent of people taking care of themselves, wearing a mask, social distance, all the everything. Why weren't there better instructions from on high about taking care of the host? Because it seems to me all the things that you talk about in your new book, and we've been talking about till we're blue in the face, and like Amy said, we know this so well, we take for granted what we know. Why aren't we telling people how to improve their metabolic health, how to improve their immune system, how to take enough vitamin D, which we now have several studies that show that it's got great efficacy in dealing with this virus. Even a couple of papers on ketogenic diets kind of being helpful in this realm as well. Why wasn't that the focus rather than mask up, socially distance, lockdown? It seems to me those were good things, but they weren't the complete picture.
That's a great question. The medical world is reactive. So what I saw in 2020 is that the word got out. People being hospitalized, they were more likely to have diabetes. They were more likely to have metabolic problems. And then as time went on, studies started coming out. It takes months for studies really to come out and get published, even in a rapid publication kind of way. So then it was actually people tend to get sick more if they have these underlying metabolic things. And then finally, there was a paper that basically laid out how high insulin levels make everything worse. Oh wait, have you ever heard of high insulin levels from eating carbohydrates?
What?
Yeah,
What?
so
What did I say?
but it's like connecting the dots. But in a traditional doctor's mind, diabetes is something you manage with drugs. It's not something you fix, a metabolism that you can fix. So I think it's the lag time it takes for this to get through, and then what's the vested interest that will benefit from you not getting sick and then having less sickness. I mean, it's really, again, a grassroots kind of movement of getting the knowledge out there. And so, yeah, this is a time when, focus on the beef brisket and collards, and cut the sugar out. And, in a metabolic weight loss clinic, keto clinic that I have now, it was about, I don't know, half and half. Half the folks did great. I mean, they weren't going out for desserts, and they even lost weight over 2020. The other half emotionally ate carbs and gained weight. And so we call in the obesity clinic the COVID-19 pounds that you gained, basically. So anyway.
Like the freshman 15, the
freshman, the COVID-19.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, now is the time to really focus on your metabolic health. And that's something that I think the medical world waits for a randomized trial, turning that information around into a prospective study.
Yes.
You can search clinicaltrials.gov, and I did see there was a study at least proposed at Johns Hopkins to use keto for COVID, which would make sense if they've used keto for childhood epilepsy for so long. I never could get the folks at Duke interested, and even I wasn't pushing that real hard there. In fact, fortunately, we didn't have a whole lot of hospitalized folks to do large trials in Durham at Duke. So that's the other thing. You need to find a population that, so if you can imagine who's lining up to do studies on COVID patients, drug company, drug company, drug company, drug company, and, how do you get keto in there, right? But James D. Nicolantonio wrote an excellent paper on the theory of why keeping insulin low and a low-carb keto diet would be good to prevent getting and prevent complications of COVID-19. It's a great article.
Man, you nailed it when you said that doctors don't see it as a metabolic issue, but as a drug issue, that they deal with the diabetes and some of these comorbidities. And the average comorbidity of the people who die is 3. And obesity being one of them, and diabetes and all the rest. And so it's just been unfortunate that we have answers, or at least potential answers, that are being completely ignored. And how easy would it be to just tell people, bump up your vitamin D? Vitamin D is so stupid inexpensive. Since the beginning of this whole thing, I've been taking about 25,000 IU a day of vitamin D just to make sure my levels are high enough. I backed down during the summer when I was getting extra sunshine, but now that it's shorter days again, I've been bumping it back up again, and it's been helpful. I haven't really been sick, and I haven't been exposed to the virus. I know we eventually all will, but hopefully the host is good and healthy enough by the time it does hit.
I do want to emphasize, though, that we don't mean to give the impression that following a ketogenic diet makes you immune and you can ignore all the other protective measures, but certainly I think it would reduce risk. It would make you less susceptible, and if you do get it, you might have a much better time, a much easier time of dealing with it. But nobody should think that keto is like magical immunity to everything.
Right.
Yeah, Metabolic Mike just got the Rona, and he did a whole video about it. You guys know Mike, Metabolic Mike?
Is that Mike Mutzel, or is that? Yeah.
And then Andreas Ehrenfeld talked a little bit.
Oh, he did as well.
Yes.
Diet doctor.
Yeah, the main thing that he didn't like is that they made him stay in the garage. He didn't have many symptoms, fortunately. But
Yes. Well, guys, that is Dr. Eric Westman, EC Westman, over on Instagram. I see you're very active lately promoting your new book. Good job, by the way. As an author, I admire when other authors are very proactive at pushing their own book.
So you like this throwback. I had page 4 is bringing in a little, it's $9.99. So I'm setting that aside, and I'm hiring a local, Lynn Ivy, to help with the Instagram and Twitter and getting information out. So I finally come to that stage where I can hire someone to do it. I know it's been a while, Jimmy, but
I have begged you forever
I know.
do better on social media because it's miserable, brother. But there's the little lady, To It Nutrition is Amy Berger over on Instagram. Go check them out.
Much more active on Twitter, same handle. I do have Instagram, but I'm much more active on Twitter.
And I'm the opposite. What I do is I post on Instagram, and then it has a little button that lets you throw the exact same thing to Twitter. So I hardly ever post directly to Twitter. It's always as an adjunct to my Instagram.
Well, you're the guru.
I've just done it a long time. Here's the new book, you guys. End Your Carb Confusion. Dr. Eric Westman, New York Times bestselling author, and Amy Berger. And God bless you, Amy, for putting up with him writing a book. Just kidding. I love you both very much. And congratulations. And I wish you well with the book.
Thank you so much. And Happy New Year. Wish you the best for 2021.